Welcome everyone, and thank you for attending this evening's webinar. My name's Talia Newton. I'm the Climate Emergency Project Officer at Basco Shire Council, and I'll be your MC for tonight's webinar. I'd like to start tonight by acknowledging the Bunurong and the Gunai peoples as the traditional owners and custodians of the lands and waters that I, and I'm sure many of you as well, live and work on. I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, as well as any Aboriginal elders of other communities who might be joining us tonight. If you are joining us from elsewhere in Victoria, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat and acknowledge the country that you're joining us from. Tonight's webinar, Water and Greening, is part of a series of webinars that Bass Coast and South Gippsland Shire Councils have partnered with Renew on across 2024. Renew have been working in the sustainability space for over 40 years as an independent, not-for-profit body with a mission to inspire, enable, and advocate for people to live sustainably within their homes and communities. This webinar and all the webinars in the series will be recorded and made available on the CAP, the Community Action Portal, for future viewing. The first 6 webinars in the Sustainable Living series, covering topics like solar, home batteries, all-electric homes, electric vehicles, they're now available to watch online. If you missed any of those live events, the link to those will be in the chat. The 2024 Sustainable Living series is designed to equip you with the information and knowledge so that you can make your homes more comfortable, more energy efficient, cheaper to run, as well as more environmentally friendly to live in. So now, without any further delay, welcome to Michael Hughes, our expert presenter for tonight. Mike discovered permaculture over 10 years ago after being inspired to leave the mining industry, slow down and tread lighter. He renovated his house as an owner-builder, became vegan, completed a permaculture design certificate, and started Let's Grow Shopping, whose goal is to help others become the change they wish to see in the world. Mike opens his demonstration garden during the Sydney Edible Garden Trail, and his home has been featured during Sustainable House Day. He has also appeared on Gardening Australia. Welcome, and over to you, Mike.
Thanks a lot, Talia. So I'll get, just before we start getting into the detail of it, there's a federal government's Your Home Guide is a fantastic free online resource explaining the basics behind a sustainable home and covers much of the same content we're going to discuss tonight. There's quite a lot of information in this presentation I'm going to give, and we've got to move through it fairly quickly to fit it in. The last slide contains a list of resources to help you dive into certain topics if you wish. And we should have time at the end of the presentation for a Q&A session if you've got any questions later on. So what we'll cover tonight, we'll look at water in the landscape and something called water-sensitive urban design, and then focus in on our houses and gardens with rainwater management and using plants to help with climate control. We'll also look at some strategies for cleverly distributing stormwater and keeping your garden hydrated. So first up is water-sensitive urban design. Without water, nothing lives, including us. And as we've seen with floods in places like Lismore, it can destroy life as easy as it creates. And we need to not underestimate it. So our urban designs are having negative impacts on the landscape, and water-sensitive urban design is a great step in the right direction to remedy that. So if you, it's about becoming more sensitive to the natural water cycle in our urban environments, which will lead to reducing the pollution in waterways, reducing flood risk, increasing the cooling effect of transpiration, which is something we'll talk about, keep referring to, and it replenishes the natural groundwater. If you look at that diagram there on the right, it's we'll start with forested land. If you've got, they're the two extremes. So 100% forested land up to 85% of the water that falls on that land as rain is evaporated or transpired back into the atmosphere. So this cools the air and creates more rain. And if you think about an example of that, the Amazon rainforest has its own weather system, and that's what's happening. A lot of the water is evaporated and transpired back into the air and falls back as more rain. About 15% infiltrates down to the water table and really slowly through the rocks and bedrock percolates down to the river to run off. And then looking at the other side of that picture, the urban land, only about 15% of the water evaporates into the atmosphere. So there's not much cooling effect at all. There's no increase in precipitation. About 85% of the water hits hard surfaces and is directed as quickly as possible into the stormwater system and runs off. There's nothing in the water table. And if you think about the differences between those two systems, one has the water slowly running into the river system, flowing through the rocks, and the other has a lot of water running immediately into the river system. So it creates this flood risk. So before you start doing anything on your own property, it's really great to observe what's going on and trying to figure out what was there before houses and development and where the water went. And then when you concentrate on your own property, where does the water enter and leave it? And in what kind of volume? Does it get funneled anywhere? Are there boggy patches? And it's about trying to use those and design with those in mind rather than trying to just change the whole landscape to bend to our will. So the main principles of water-sensitive urban design are to slow it down, soak it up, and let it sink in. And in effect, you're making the water work harder. And if you look at that picture there, the champagne tower, gravity is your friend. And so I'll keep referring back to this sort of champagne tower effect. If you get rid of all the glasses and just pour the champagne straight on the table, it obviously runs off all over the floor. And that's essentially what's happening in urban design at the moment. If you put all the glasses back into the picture and pour into the top glass, you're filling all the glasses up, making the water slow down and work and fill all the glasses up. Everyone gets a glass of champagne, everybody's happy. And so that's a general principle we're trying to follow. Each property has its own unique challenges, and so getting inspiration and ideas from many sources is the key to properly solving any issues you've got with where the water goes and what it does. There's open garden events such as Sustainable House Day that Renew run, and also edible garden trails. I noticed online that the Basque Coast Edible Garden Weekend is on the 8th and 9th of February next year. So that's a great opportunity to talk to house owners about what they're doing with water. I've been a host myself, and it's great to talk to people and find out what they're doing. And we learn as well as you guys if you're going to ask all the questions. Chatting to your neighbours, friends, and family is also worthwhile. They may not have exactly the same scenario. In fact, nobody might have exactly the same scenario as your own. But what I found is that I learned bits of the puzzle with everyone I speak to. And you can gradually put together a plan that works for you from all that advice. Having a plan is a really big part of doing anything with the water, particularly the mains and stormwater. If you've already got your home built and you engage a landscaper, the first thing they do is earthworks, and the second thing they do is lay pipes, and then they will put infrastructure in. So if you're trying to move these pipes afterwards, it's really expensive. And painful to move them. So having a plan is essential. And I just wanted to show you a bit of the champagne tower effect. This photo is my own house, and I planned to do this when I built everything. So put the pointer on the picture. The water runs off my garage roof into this 10,000 litre tank. The diagonal pipe there is the overflow. So when it's filled up, it overflows down this pipe under the path into this pipe on the garden bed. It fills the garden, well, it waters the garden bed, but the garden bed doesn't fill up with water because there are two outlets in the bottom. I put a slotted ag pipe in the bottom of the bed and made a hole in the bricks to let the water out. It percolates through the wood chip path, soaking into the wood chip as it goes. And I put a pipe in the bottom of the wall of the pond. And so it'll fill the pond up. The pond overflows into this garden bed, and then that garden bed drains downhill into the rest of the garden. And so you see, you're trying to catch the water at every opportunity and make it meander through the garden rather than just letting it run straight off. We'll talk about the home, and we'll start with the flood risk. Following the Northern Rivers floods around Lismore, the New South Wales Resilient Homes Programme released a detailed flood resilience guide for new and existing homes, which is a great resource wherever you live. I've put that in the resources list at the end of this presentation. It's actually a real challenge to provide one-size-fits-all solutions because it's really property specific. You might think that flood damage is only relevant if you live on the floodplain near the river, but there are implications for living on slopes above the river as well. Where I am, we're high on the ridges, and the rivers are obviously down in the valleys below. But I've talked to quite a lot of people and been to their homes, and what seems to be a really common occurrence is a single level home on a slope being excavated underneath to put in a granny flat or a rumpus room. And when you excavate underneath the house, you're obviously digging into the bedrock. And we had heavy rains a couple of years ago over a period of about a month and a half. And this water seeped into the bedrock above the house and seeped through the rumpus room. So some people had floods underneath their house because they didn't plan to put a proper membrane in between the rock and the rumpus room wall underneath. So you literally need a watertight plan to keep these places dry in the heaviest downpours. A simple way of keeping water away or keeping the water immediately around the home drier is just building roof eaves and possibly a wraparound veranda. So we'll talk later about using garden landscaping to reduce the impacts of heavy rain. One of the biggest immediate water savings, and also a real empowering way for individuals to make a difference, is doing a water audit of your household usage. And this helps you work out where it's going in your own house and what your own habits are doing. And if you want water tanks, it's a great way of working out how much you need to harvest. Do you need a 10,000 litre tank or a 25,000 litre tank? So most water goes straight down the sewage system, but particularly thinking about grey water in the garden, changing some of your habits and redirecting some of that water to make other areas of your redirecting some of that water to other areas of your property might be the largest saving you can make. Again, it's all about making water work harder and possibly getting 2 or 3 uses out of it rather than just one. There are a couple of resources listed at the end of this presentation to help you work out how much water you currently use, so you can see where you can make the savings. And there's a particular calculator at the Smart Watermark site. And I've realized that most water companies, it's a not-for-profit company that are running this calculator, and they're helping councils manage water use. And so they've got some great information on that site as well. The Australian Water Efficiency Labelling and Standards Scheme, so WELS scheme, requires products such as shower heads, toilets, washing machines, dishwashers, taps and flow controllers to be rated, and they're labelled for the water efficiency. And this star rating helps you make the most water efficient choice for your budget. There's a certain limit though. Water consumption also influences the energy consumption for appliances that use hot water, such as dishwashers. So whilst lower water use is better, it's only better if it doesn't compromise the appliance's effectiveness in an energy perspective as well. So you can look at www.waterrating.gov.au for the most water efficient appliances and some more information. A really simple way of saving water is just putting the external hot water system right next to where it's going to be used in the house. So I'm sure we've all stood in the shower and the water's freezing cold, and you let that run down the plug hole before you hop in when the hot comes through. You can minimize the amount of cold water there is just simply by having that hot water system right outside the bathroom wall. And you're reducing the amount of pipe work the hot water has to travel through before it comes out. And so that saves both water and the energy to heat that water in the first place. Placing water tanks near where they'll be used outside the house as well is a great way of using less infrastructure and less pipe work to get them to where they're needed. And grey water. I'll just explain what grey water is first. There's toilet and nappy washing water is considered black, full of pathogens, not very good. You can use this, but there's a whole level of complexity about using it. Rules and regulations, and it's kind of above the level of this conversation. The water from the kitchen sink is a mixture of both black and grey, and a whole load of other, if you're cooking meat, you've got fat and oils, so you need a grease trap. For simple grey water, you're looking at the hand basin, shower, and laundry. And so when we're using grey water, we need to kind of plan quite carefully because it needs to be free flowing to the garden. You can't let it sit for more than 24 hours, otherwise it'll start developing nasty side effects, and the chemical breakdown might be harmful to people's health. It can be a significant change to your habits, and we'll discuss a bit more about that in a minute. But a side effect as well is you need to analyze your cleaning products so that they contain no hazardous or harmful chemicals, because they'll just build up in your garden. So looking for eco-friendly, low-impact cleaning products is a must. This is a simple diagram of, on the left there, of a grey water system. So you've got the sink hooked up to the storm water, and to make it go into the garden, you can put a diverter valve on it. So when it's good to go into the garden, switch it to grey water for the garden. When it's not, you can put it back to the storm water and do what you need to in the garden to make it work again. When you make it run out of the house into the garden, the pipe needs to be underground, well, not underground, under the mulch layer is ideal. Again, if you leave the water on the surface, it's going to develop bad chemicals. And if you've got young kids or pets hanging around, they could be poisoned by what's on the surface in the water. So having it under the layer of mulch makes the water come into contact with the soil as quickly as possible. And the microbes in the soil and the bacteria will work on those chemicals and break them down into harmless, just soil additives. The middle picture there shows a slotted ag pipe in the mulch, and that's ideal. You want a leaky pipe that just leaks all through the soil. If you need it to go further, there are purple PVC pipes, and the colour purple so you know exactly what it is. You don't want to get it mixed up with your other irrigation pipes. Grey water is not very good for using on vegetables. Particularly leafy greens will suck up all the water, including all the chemicals from whatever's in it, into their leaves. And if you put those leaves on your salad, you're going to ingest them all. The one thing it is great for, or the things that it is great for, are ornamentals and trees, and particularly fruit trees. Anything with a woody stem, the chemicals don't get up into the outer parts of the tree. So you're fine with anything woody. With gutters and rainwater harvesting, what you're essentially talking about is tanks and the infrastructure involved in getting tanks in. And so the first step is to, if you're going to get a water tank, is to decide whether you're going to supply the house, the garden, or both. So obviously there's a volume factor there. Any water destined for a tank needs to be as clean as you can make it. And whilst this might look a lot like a lot of infrastructure that I'm going to describe in a minute, maintaining this infrastructure is a lot easier than cleaning out the inside of a tank, which is actually quite a dangerous job. So the first step in the infrastructure is maintaining your gutters and using gutter guard like the picture shows. You can also, just below the gutter, have a leaf diverter. So that's simply a grate that the water goes straight down into the pipe, but the grate blocks all the leaves and they just blow off the surface of it. And then the next level of cleanliness is a first flush system. So I'll just put the pointer up and describe this again. The horizontal pipes at the top come straight from the gutters, and they flow into this vertical pipe, which is the first flush system. And you can see that that pipe used to continue down, and that would be going to the stormwater system. So you can make a simple cut in the pipe to allow the first flush to be in effect. What's on the bottom there is just a simple screw cap and a leaky valve so that just drips. So after you've had a dry period, there's a bit of gunk on the roof and in the gutters. It starts to rain. That gunk is in the first 20 or so litres of water that come down the pipes, and that fills up this bottom section of the pipe. So hopefully there's not too much gunk, and by the time the pipe fills up to this level, the water's fairly clean coming off your roof, and it flows down here into the tank. The drippy valve at the bottom just keeps dripping, and obviously most rain events are going to deliver water at a bigger volume than the drip can manage, so the pipe does fill up. But once the rain stops, that drip just keeps continuing, and all the water drips down into the stormwater pipe. And you can unscrew this cap once it's finished dripping and empty all the gunk out and into your compost. And so screw the cap back on and you're good to go again for the next rain event. This picture shows as well another principle I'm going to refer to later. Most people, and it took me a while to sort of fully grasp this, because it's only when you get a tank you realize what's really going on. A lot of rainwater events deliver quite a lot of water into the tank. And once the tank's full, that same volume of water is coming out of the outflow, and it can get quite powerful. So this picture shows quite well the outflow pipe, and I would say more than likely below the bottom of this picture, it's going back into the stormwater system, which is kind of ideal. You're creating a closed loop system. I've seen a lot where people get a tank and just put the outflow going into the garden, and the outflow is enough to erode all the soil out of garden beds. So it's really worth making a plan of what you're going to do with that outflow before you start. And if you've never seen the top of a water tank, they all come with a basket, which is the next line of defense to keep your water clean. And so this basket is just like mozzie mesh, but strong mozzie mesh. And it stops large debris and particularly wildlife from getting into your tank. There'd be nothing like having a couple of rats floating around there to deter you from using that water. This basket needs cleaning probably twice a year, and so you need space around it to get a ladder. I don't lean ladders against my water tank. I'd much prefer leaning against, if it's next to a wall, the wall, or the fence, or just having a freestanding A-frame ladder to get up and have a look at it. And then how do we know how big the tank needs to be? Well, Renew have this great tool on their website called the Tankulator, which is there's a link to that at the end of this presentation too. Most commercial tank manufacturers have some kind of a calculator on their website. Some are great and some are a bit too simplistic. It's worth shopping around and just getting a feel for what kind of figures you need for your situation. I've included a sample water tank volume calculation I did for my own house in the resources at the end of this presentation. And all you're really doing is calculating how big your house is. So that's the catchment by your yearly rainfall. And you can get an idea of how much water you can actually catch if you kept it all in water tanks. And then to work out the size of tank you need, you just need to do that water audit that we mentioned earlier and work out how much water you use in a day. Actually, there's another simple way. If you look at your water bill, you can get an average value of how much water you use in a day and multiply that daily amount by the longest drought you would expect to have. So for my own house, it was like 3 months. 3 months. And that gives you, if you wanted water for the house, garden, at the house and garden, that's the total volume of water tanks you would need. And it's quite a staggering volume. So you might have enough room around your house to store that much water, and I certainly don't. Your required volume doesn't have to be in all one tank. For a bit of insurance, it's actually better to have a couple of tanks in case one leaks or needs maintenance. Placing water tanks on the dark, unused side of your house, if you have a choice, is a good idea. Most houses have a side that nobody really goes around. And then there's loads of different types of water tanks to fit different situations. So if you haven't got much room, I'll just put the pointer on again. If you haven't got much room, you can get the rectangle tanks that sort of slot down the path. Stainless steel is a good option because they're more expensive, but they are recyclable for the life of the product, so you can make other things with them after their use of the tank is finished. PVC obviously rots in the sun. These PVC tanks are actually underneath the house, which is ideal because then you're protecting them from the sun. The one at the bottom there is a bladder. So obviously that bladder could roll up or fold up into quite a small package to get underneath the house. And you can see there it's in quite a small gap underneath someone's house. I'm a bit nervous about having bladders under my own house. A couple of 1,000 litres of water leaking all underneath my house doesn't sound too great. But I know some people who've got them. And the other factor to consider with a bladder is that they're definitely always underneath your house. So you need a pump to get the water to your taps. If you've got a sloped block, if possible, getting the water tank as high as possible in the landscape is a great idea because then you can use gravity to feed it everywhere. The two options on the right-hand side there are just two really simple ideas that you can put on the garden shed, or they're particularly good for renters. So they're portable and you can move them to the next house if you want to set it up again. If you're using something as simple as just an olive barrel to catch water in, you can just have the overflow going into a garden bed and water the garden bed. You would only want that off a really small roof like the garden shed. And then IBCs are another great option. There are lots of videos on YouTube about people hooking these up in all kinds of clever ways. But a note of caution there, you want food grade IBCs. There are a lot of IBCs used in mechanics workshops for grease and oil and stuff, and you really don't want those. There are a lot of food uses for them, such as corn syrup and cordial. And so you want second-hand food grade ones if you can get hold of them. You can put tanks in the garden if you don't have room down the side of the house and use trellis or like landscape them into the garden. You just need to make sure, as I said before, about having that access to the basket to be able to clean it out a couple of times a year. Which brings us to the garden. And native plants are the go-to water-saving garden choice for low maintenance and time-poor gardeners. You really can't beat having plants in your garden that grow naturally in the landscape all around you. Councils have lists of suitable local plants if you're struggling for what to do. I go for walks in the bush around my house and take photos of plants that I like the look of. And you can get an app on your phone that will identify that. And so you go to the nursery and buy what you want. And this photo shows really well something I'm going to refer to again, the forest effect of a garden. So making sure you've got taller trees, then shrubs, waist-high herbs, and then ground covers. It gives you this cooling forest effect all around the house. So the more layers you have, the sort of damper your soil is going to be, and you'll have this cooling transpiration effect just keep happening. Placing garden beds on contours wherever possible, so that they're at right angles to the water flow, is another great way of getting water to slow down. And this, using the contours of your land to dictate the landscaping, creates a much more like natural looking landscape rather than straight lines and angles. The photo there is of my own verge garden, and I get lots of comments about how natural my garden is, and it's due to that. It's not, it's not all right angles and walls. I've just got things flowing with the way the landscape is shaped. And so a contour is, the top diagram here shows, it's just a dead level line above sea level. And so if you're looking at the photo, we're looking directly along the contour, which is this direction. And if you walk left, you're going downhill. If you walk right, you're going uphill. You'll notice that my garden beds aren't in line with the curb on the street. They're on the contour. So water runs down the lawn and hits the garden bed. And if it's dead on contour, it has to make a decision to either go left or right or both. Whilst it's doing that, it's sort of getting backed up against the garden bed and slowing down and soaking in. Eventually, it leaks around the edge. And if you've got another garden bed, like the one at the top here, would leak around and hit the next one down, and then it come down and hit this one. And you're creating that champagne tower effect, just of water running through the landscape. And the water's all soaking in and keeping the water under those trees hydrated for longer. And another factor of that is the type of soil you have. So to keep that soil moist for longer, you need to most people around me need to do something with it. Clay soil doesn't let the water soak in easily, and sandy soil drains really efficiently. And the solution to both of those problems is organic matter. It makes your soil more like a sponge. If you think of a really rotten piece of wood that's been lying around the garden for years, when you pick it up, it goes all soft and spongy, and you can sort of see water come out of it when you squeeze it, and it's all greasy. Organic matter in sort of that's broken down mulch is like having tens of thousands of pieces of that all through the soil. And so in clay soil, it links up, they link up to make pathways through the clay so that water can get into that clay and break it down. And then in sandy soil, those particles actually hold on to the water and stop it draining through so quickly. If you want to create amazing soil, you can do this on top of a garden bed, on top of the lawn, even on top of concrete if you want to build a garden bed on concrete. You can make a no-dig garden bed. These photos show what I did on my front lawn. And so it was over lawn, so I wanted to choke the lawn and sort of kill it. So I put cardboard down first, and then layers and layers of organic matter. And you just keep building that up until you've got, I'm thinking, lucerne, horse manure, mushroom compost, all kinds of stuff. The wider the variety, the better. And you want to layer about probably 300 mil deep, and that'll break down to at least half that over time as it all composts. You're essentially making a compost pile all over your garden. Once you've done that, you need to keep the mulch layer up. So at least once a year, mulch heavily 10 to 15 centimeters. And again, mixing that up, that mulch material, gives you the diversity of minerals and additives you're putting into your soil. So one year you could do decomposed wood chip. The next year, well-rotted horse manure. The year after that, use mushroom compost. And the year after that, you can use your own compost if you have enough. You can actually use on an ongoing basis anything that isn't a noxious weed as mulch. So even the trees I have growing now, I don't bother taking the prunings back to my own compost piles. I just chop them into small bits and leave them on the floor under the trees and just add to the mulch layer. You can also grow living mulch, like dense ground cover, like baby sunrose is one, strawberries, pumpkins, native violets. If you on a hot day stick your hand through a layer of baby sunrose or native violets on the ground, the water below is still nice and damp and cool. The soil below is still nice and damp and cool. And so it stays damp for ages after rain has fallen. And so just some other tips about water-saving garden design. So making use of what you already have in the landscape. So I said before about boggy patches or where the water flows. Try and make use of that instead of, just altering everything to suit our wants. You can make really great use of things that are already happening. And this example here, the top picture shows we used to have a rock outcrop over half the garden before I built garden beds all over it. And that water used to collect in that middle point there. Frogs would have tadpoles in it, and they'd have to grow up pretty quickly before the water evaporated in the sun. I just bricked in around that, and the water filled it up and makes more of a permanent pond. I have to top it up from time to time, but now it's a permanent feature of the garden, which is the bottom photo. Ponds can be linked up in chains all through your garden with spoon drains. So if you've got a low point at the overflow of the pond, it can overflow into another pond down the hill, and so on and so on. and make a really great feature of your garden. And probably if you're into the wildlife, the single biggest factor in improving the biodiversity in your garden is a pond. And then another great little option is an outdoor sink. This is all about your habits. So I was washing potatoes and leafy greens from the garden in my kitchen sink. And one day I was like, I need to do something about this. This is just being wasted down the stormwater system. So I snaffled a sink off the side of the road at council cleanup and made an outdoor sink. And it just simply goes into that horizontal pipe on the left there and waters my kiwi fruit vines as I'm washing the potatoes. You can provide shade for your house by using fixed or adjustable building elements, such as eaves, awnings, fences, external blinds, trellises, or even by natural elements such as trees and shrubs, which we'll look at in a minute. So you can build that pergola on the back of their house there. It's got a beautiful grapevine going up it. It shades the hot western sun with the leaves in the summer, and in the winter, it's a deciduous vine, so all its leaves will drop. The sun is lower in the sky, and the sun will penetrate through the patio window there and heat the house up. And so this is really great for north-facing facades. Another example here is from my own home. I built a pergola over the west side of our house, which makes a massive difference to the internal temperature in summer. And I keep the garden beds full of plants like that all the time for this transpiration effect. So you've got actually cool air there now instead of hot, baking westerly breezes. So again, this is taking advantage of all the layers of the forest to reduce the ambient temperature on the outside of your house, which will in turn reduce the temperature inside your house. And this last picture shows a good example of high trees and layers of the forest. I don't know if you've ever put a trampoline in your garden, but the grass grows a lot better under a trampoline than it does on the rest of the lawn. And that gum tree on the left is having the same effect on my garden and the house. So it's providing dappled shade from the western sun, and the plants below it grow a lot better with that than without it. It stops them from being scorched by excessive summer sun. Another great element for insulation and to provide cooling transpiration effects is a green roof. These are a bit of a step up in planning. They require engineering to carry all that weight of soil, and when water falls on it, I would imagine it's sort of at least double the weight. And the great part about a green roof is you've got a beautiful transpiring effect of the greenery, where otherwise there would be heat coming from radiant tiles or reflective materials such as colour bond. So we talked before about redirecting the water flow around the house in heavy weather, heavy rain. Swales, French drains and spoon drains are really simple solutions to soaking water up and moving it around the property. These pictures show swales on my back lawn. The water used to run straight off the lawn, pool at the end, and we've got a cliff edge along there, and it just used to absolutely teem off the edge of that cliff, and there's houses below there. You can see where I've marked out the contours on the lawn, and it's not a very steep slope, but I just made contours about 2 meters apart. And then I dug along the contours and put the 200 mil trench and put the soil on the garden beds. Then you fill those trenches up with wood chip, and so you've got a nice porous material that allows water to soak into it. And so you can actually store quite a lot of water, but the wood chip is soaking it up all the time as well. And yeah, I've grown trees in the garden beds and made a food forest, and this bottom picture shows what it looks like now. And so the water, I'll show this pipe in a bit more detail in a second, but the water from my driveway goes down a pipe and into this level. It's called a level spreader. It's just a long pipe with holes all the way along it, and water comes out of there through these holes all at the same time. And again, this champagne effect fills up the first swale, overflows into the second swale, third swale. I've never seen it get past the second one, but it's obviously soaking into the landscape. And this photo shows the level spreader with all those holes pouring water at the same time. The top garden bed, I've not put fruit trees in because it's obviously going to have a lot of detritus from the driveway and possibly oil. And so this garden bed acts as a sort of biofilter before it gets to anywhere I want cleaner water. And you can see in this rain event, I filled the first swale is filled up and is overflowing into the second. It's actually quite satisfying when you've made this stuff and get out in the rain and watch it work. So French drains and spoon drains can encourage surface water to move around your house down a slope. So if you put the drain slightly off contour, so it's going downhill somewhere, if you imagine a really heavy rainfall, the water would seep through the soil. This is a French drain. It's just a trench dug like the swale with landscaping cloth around the outside. You put a layer of gravel in the bottom, probably about 5 to 10 centimeters deep, a pipe in, and then fill the trench with gravel and wrap the landscaping cloth ideally over the top of it as well. You can leave it open if you want surface water to go into it, but essentially water seeping through this soil here, it'd have quite a hard time getting through, but in heavy rain, that's what it's going to do. And if it hits the gravel, there's loads of pore space in that gravel, and it will take the path of least resistance, which is the gravel. And if this trench is going downhill, water traveling in this direction will immediately just start traveling down the hill and not reach the other side. If you put the slotted pipe in there, when really heavy rain gets going, the pipe provides one massive pore space for a lot of water to immediately flow away rather than through to your property, into the walls of your property. So again, small volumes of rain will just soak in, but it's these big rain events that French drains and spoon drains are really good at getting rid of the bulk water. And so these two on the bottom photos are spoon drains. And if you've got heavy rainfall onto a particular flattish area of your land, you can redirect, get it to gather by just angling your pavers on the path into a little drain and have the main bulk of that water pour down the path rather than into your house wall. So lawns, garden beds, gravel, paving, and even fake grass are all permeable and contribute to this water-sensitive urban design. And there's loads of products available now that are creative that let you soak water into the landscape rather than have it run off. So you see a couple of examples there using cobblestones with gravel in the middle. You could have the Japanese style gravel garden with combed gravel. And then people use it reminds me of the 70s and the old school driveways where they had grass in the middle of the driveway. But there are all sorts of products you can get now where it's sort of a concrete masonry base and grass growing through it. So it looks like you've got a lawn, but you can actually drive on it quite safely. And then you can even get now permeable asphalt and concrete. I've never actually seen this in action, so I don't know what it's like. But yeah, some quite amazing products available nowadays. Some other examples of utilizing water effectively to green your property are one of them is wicking beds. And these are great for time-poor gardeners. And then they need to be installed on a level pad. There are multiple solutions available. Like there's loads of different varieties of homemade ones, and you can purchase them off the shelf in various forms as well. There's some manufacturers listed at the end of this presentation. These pictures show ones I made myself out of intermediate bulk containers, just cut in half and make 2 garden beds. So one of those is 1 meter squared. So you've got 2 meters squared of garden space for each IBC. And the water reservoir is underneath the garden bed, underneath the soil. So in this example, the Rio mesh is the top of the water reservoir and the bottom of the soil. And what I did was line this whole thing up the sides and across the bottom with landscaping cloth, fill it with soil, and I'm growing veggies in there. And the great part about these kind of beds is that the plant gets the water they need rather than you trying to estimate how much water they need from the top with a watering can. They actually wick water up from the bottom. They act like a pump. Their roots are drawing water all the time, and they basically wick it up from the reservoir below at the rate they want it, depending on the weather. This is a commercial example, a water ups example. So they provide a corrugated iron outer garden bed with a plastic reservoir in the bottom. I think it's about 15 centimeters deep. And then these clever panels that link together so you can scale them. If you want longer ones, you can get longer ones and put them in any direction you want. And these holes in the panels are the legs. So underneath there is the water where the water reservoir would be. They're the holes, and you fill them with perlite. And so the perlite acts as the wicking medium to get the water to the soil. So yeah, again, landscaping cloth over the top and put soil in that and grow veggies in. And so to neaten that up, you just cut the landscaping cloth around the edge. The pipe is simply a refill medium. So you just put your hose in the top of it and refill the underneath. You don't have to just pour water on the surface and let it drain through. So because there's no evaporation, these beds are really great at saving the amount of water you put on. You probably only need to fill them up in the middle of summer, probably once a week if you had it full of plants and it was baking weather. Rain gardens are another fantastic way of dealing with bulk, heavy flows. The next picture shows a great example of that, but I'll just describe how it works with this cross section. So you're putting very porous gravel and sandy material in a depression in the earth and growing plants in it. Some people put rocks on the top so that none of it gets disturbed in heavy flows, and you can grow like grasses in this. You want plants that are able to grow in sandy mediums, and like in quite dry conditions most of the time, but then once in a while they'll get absolutely flooded. And if you get really heavy water flows, putting a pipe, much like a French drain, that pipe would allow really heavy flow to just flow straight out of there. And you could make that go into a pond or somewhere else downslope if you've got anywhere for it to go to, or even back into the stormwater system down the slope if that's how it works. Again, every property is unique. So I'll just show you this next slide, which is one in action. The inflow is coming from this downpipe here, and it's you can see just about there that it's quite a heavy flow. And to stop that flow eroding the channel out, they've filled it with rocks. The water flow goes into this is the actual garden, so the basin full of gravel and sand. It fills that up. And like I was saying with the tank before, once that's full, it acts just like a tank. The outflow will be the same as the inflow. And so that heavy flow will be going out of the outflow, which they've lined with rocks again to stop that getting eroded. And so that just goes directly to the street and into the stormwater system as usual. But the great part is that all the water that's in here is soaking into the landscape over a long period of time. And so that, yeah, downhill from there, the water would be hydrated for ages afterwards. And another really clever level spreader is this. I love this idea. So the trough in the middle there is filled with filled with rocks. The water fills that long trough up all at the same time to the same level, so that it all overflows at the same time in a sheet of water into the whole garden bed, like the whole length of it. Again, the internet has endless variations on these things that it's quite fun to have a look at. And just lastly, we'll discuss BioWise gardens. Again, this is really property specific. The shape of the landscape really heavily influences the type of fire hazard you're going to have. So if you're on the edge of the cliff, you've got a completely different fire exposure to being on the valley floor. So again, the observations you make of your property and talking to your neighbours will let you know what kind of issues you may have. The first thing there, use fire retardant plants. There are plants that are more fire retardant, but I don't want to leave you under any false pretenses that you can surround your house with fire retardant plants and it won't burn. Everything burns eventually, but some trees can resist being burnt until they dry out. And a particularly good example of that is deciduous trees. Some people have produced lists of trees and plants that have first-hand experience of how they fare in bushfire conditions, and I've listed one of those at the end of this presentation. Spacing the plants out in your garden reduces the risk of ember attack and the chance that one bush burning will set fire to the one next door. If you use non-flammable materials, either like recycled brick and stone, and obviously way less flammable than, or not flammable compared to using wooden garden beds. And then there's the all-important maintenance, so clearing the leaf litter and drop branches. And if you've got the tanks, you're clearing the gutters already. And this is sort of a culmination of all of this presentation. If you've got a really hydrated landscape, you're going to have, I would imagine, cooler burns because of the transpiration effect of that soil. Like you're going to have cooler air, a more damp soil, and so it won't burn so intensively as somewhere that's parched dry with dry plants. And this last photo is just a really dramatic shot. And it's a good idea to have a perimeter of where you keep the trees clear if you're on a rural property. So you can see they've done that around the house. But I saw this on the news, this picture, and just had to go and find it on the internet. And the mulberry tree is actually credited with saving the house. A mulberry tree is a deciduous tree, provided that transpiration effect and apparently saved this house. So you can see the sort of effects on the rest of the landscape. And this is the resources list, which brings me almost to the close of my presentation. And just lastly, this is the example of the tank calculation that I did for my own home. It's not too complicated. I'm kind of nerdy about this stuff. I love researching this kind of thing. So if you want to get into the detail, it's a good thing to do. But yes, there are calculators online that do a great job as well. And thank you.
Thanks so much for that, Mike. That was great. I might just go through a couple of things now and then we'll get into the Q&A, but anyone can put questions they have into the Q&A section now. I'll just start out by talking about a couple of programs that we have available at the moment. At any of the local Miley libraries, there are thermal imaging cameras and home energy kits that are available to borrow for free, and water efficiency kits as well. So the kits include instruction manuals to help you identify areas of heat loss in the case of the thermal imaging cameras, and there'll be a link in the chat for more information about those. Bass Coast Shire Council are also partnering with Bass Coast Adult Learning, as well as the 8 community gardens that are across Bass Coast, for a series of productive gardening workshops called Garden Gems. Those sessions are aimed to focus around sustainability, health, as well as community connection through gardening. So those are all free to attend. They cover a variety of different topics around sustainable gardening, and there'll be a link to the chat to find out more information and to register for those as well. We will have probably about 20-25 minutes available for questions. So if you do have a question, pop it into the Q&A function and we'll answer as many as we can. You can also upvote questions by pressing the thumbs up icon in the chat if you want as well. We have a few questions there now. The first question, for people who are starting their planning from scratch and that are able to, would you recommend a septic tank system rather than main sewage?
That's going to depend hugely. If you're in rural areas, like I'm not I'm in a very urban area, so I don't ever really deal with septic tanks, but like you're not even allowed one, I don't think, in my council area.
Yeah.
But yes, that's worth looking at in rural areas. Dealing with your own waste on site is definitely better, in my opinion. But yeah, that's more of a question for that kind of engineering and the specific council you live in.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you. Next question. So you mentioned that the metal tanks are preferable because they're recyclable and can be reused. With the PVC tanks, if they're deteriorating in the sun, does that mean there could be things that are leaching into the water?
Yeah, there's it. When I was purchasing tanks, I went to the nth degree and researched a lot.
Yeah.
There's an article by I'm into permaculture, and there's a people called Milkwood, and they wrote this article that went right into the detail of all of the different types of tank. So not all metal tanks are recyclable for the life, only stainless steel ones. You can get like corrugated iron normal tanks, but they have a PVC lining on the inside. And Milkwood asked manufacturers, is this BPA free? And none of them would give them an answer to it. So they basically said, guilt by association, yes, it is BPA emitting. The plastic tanks are BPA emitting. I don't think they can get around that. And they have a lifespan, like it's a long lifespan, like 15, 20 years. But eventually they will, start breaking down, especially if they're in the sun.
Yeah. Wow.
And I should say, when I actually got my stainless steel tanks, when you look at the inside of them, there's quite a lot of silicon used to fill the gaps and stop it leaking from the there's when the rectangular tanks, there are rods on the inside that stop the walls from ballooning out when it's full, and so they're all the ends of them are covered with silicon. So there's that what I thought I was getting was a beautiful product. It's still got a lot of plasticky stuff on the inside of it as well. Even though it's out in the sun, it's still there. So it's really difficult to avoid it, in all honesty.
Yeah. Yep. Next one we've got, have you experienced many issues or major issues with your tanks? You mentioned the wildlife getting into the tanks and the I guess the top layer to prevent them from getting in. Have you experienced any issues with it though?
No, I went the extra mile and put a raised mesh cover over the top of them as well to stop things sitting in that basin. Like if something got in there and died in the basket, it's as bad as being in the tank, really. So I wanted nothing to be able to get in there, so I put a mesh cover over the top. But I've not really heard of anyone having major problems with a basket. As long as you're cleaning it out every couple of months or 6 months, you shouldn't have an issue.
Yep. The basket that you put on top, is that sort of like a domed basket, or how did you create?
Yeah, well, I just got a piece of flat mesh and bent the edges over like about 20 or 30 mil to make it raise up a little bit. So yeah, I did it myself, just like making a little box out of mesh and putting it over the top.
Yeah, great. The next question is around the no dig gardens. Do you think the method for smothering the grass would also work for aggressive types of grass like kikuyu?
Yeah, I've got to say, the grass will come through eventually. Like, it's unbelievable stuff. The best way to do it is mow the grass within an inch of its life, like as low as you can possibly get it, and then get some really nitrogen-rich, like turkey manure is fantastic if you can get hold of it. Chicken manure, the really burny, heavy nitrogen manures, spread that all over the grass, water it, and then put the cardboard on. And so the nitrogen actually burns the grass and kills it off. And so that's the best way of doing it.
Yep. Oh, great. The last question we've got at the moment is about the green roofs. Are there any issues with buildings staying damp and causing damage that you know of?
I've not heard of anyone having, I mean, I've got to say, anyone who's thinking of doing that is definitely going the extra mile, and the engineering involved in building one, you definitely wouldn't want anything wrong with it. It'd be an absolute nightmare to fix it. So yeah, I think everyone who has got one of those is like over-engineered it, if you get what I mean, so it won't leak.
Yeah,
it's not something you just do yourself because you feel like it.
Yeah. No, that's great. Thank you. That's all the questions we have for now. If anyone else has any others, if you pop them in the Q&A section quickly. Otherwise, we might just wrap things up there. Thanks so much, everyone, for coming along tonight. I hope that this was informative and helped answer some of the questions that you had around, planning a water system for your home. Thanks so much, Mike, for presenting tonight and all your very helpful information. The examples that you used from your own house were really interesting. So thanks very much for that.
No problem, my pleasure.
And thanks very much as well to Doug from Renew for his behind the scenes support as well. So just a reminder that while this webinar wraps up the Sustainable Building and Renovating series, the next webinars in the Sustainable Living series will be the Summer Comfort webinars, and they will be running in December. There'll be a link to the information and how to register for those into the chat. And just a final reminder that this webinar has been recorded. It'll be posted on the CAP, the Community Action Portal, within the next fortnight or so. So you'll be able to rewatch it, and there'll be information, links to a lot of the resources there as well. That's everything that we have tonight. Thanks so much for attending, and hope to see you all again soon.